tell us, why you hit us up about this plan and why you wanted to talk about it.
Well, I saw that Trump had put out his agenda for his presumptive second term, assuming he wins. Uh, Now, regardless of that, I thought that whether or not he wins, I think it would be important and interesting to analyze what's in this second term agenda because it, for one, helps us make up our mind on who might or might not vote for him, but also it gives us an in on what exactly the Republican Party is planning because the Republican Party has actually declined, as far as I know, to put out a platform uh, in this election cycle. So it's really they're all behind Trump, and they're going to largely agree with Trump on this, excepting, of course, any particular cases.
Okay, and Carl, did you get a chance to look over the points and stuff like that? Were you? I'm
Oh
assuming
yeah.
you weren't a big fan, right?
No, I mean, some of the things are so generic that
Yeah.
it's hard to like disagree with it. But like, I would say that yeah, there's a fair amount of things I have a problem with.
Okay, cool. I mean, that's great. I mean, so we're just gonna go through it point by point. When I was reading over them, I have a feeling that I will probably be the most in favor of the stuff in this plan. I think I'm the most pro-Trump out of these three, which is very, very interesting to me. But let's just go through it, line by line or whatever. And I'm gonna read it right now. So it's Trump campaigns and announces President Trump's second term agenda, fighting for you. Building on the incredible achievements of President Donald J. Trump's first term in office, the president's re-election campaign today released a set of core priorities for a second term under the banner of fighting for you. President Trump's boundless optimism and certainty in America's greatness is reflected in his second term goals and stands in stark contrast to the gloomy vision of America projected by Joe Biden and the Democrats. President Trump will further illuminate these plans during his acceptance speech on Thursday at the Republican National Convention. Over the coming weeks, the president will be sharing additional details about his plans through focused speeches on the campaign trail. President Trump, fighting for you. Now, my first take on these, I mean, man, it's just funny. Politics is a lot of empty platitudes and hyperbole, and that's the stuff I never get behind that much. Of just like it's like the best ever, tremendous, frankly the best, and I just maybe it does stand in stark contrast, but we're you know I guess that's the rhetoric side of it. We're gonna go through the concrete stuff and the dialectic stuff. But I thought that about both the DNC and the RNC. It was just like, yeah, more promises, more pumping up this group or that group or whatever. So the first one is jobs. So let's go over to Adavoltu. So it says create 10 million new jobs in 10 months. So why don't we talk about that one for a second?
Well, this is a common promise that a lot of presidential candidates make to create more jobs. If I remember correctly, Obama and his opponents running for office had similar promises. So it's not unusual, but the main issue I have with this one is not so much the idea of creating jobs, but how is he going to create jobs, and how is he, as the president, going to create a lot of jobs, especially 10 million? Um, is he going to increase regulations on various things? And I think later on in the plan, we do have some clarification on this. Or what are we going to do? Seize the means of production?
Yeah. So what about you, Carl? Do you? I don't know. Do you think, Carl? Do you think it's the president's job to like guarantee? Is it his job to guarantee jobs?
Well, yeah, so that's actually what I wanted to clarify because
Yeah.
I feel like Republicans always want to kind of like use the language of like Trump's like, oh, I want to create jobs, but it's like unless he's talking about public sector jobs, what he's referring to is he wants like rollback regulations and hopefully the private sector makes up for those created jobs. And also with the whole creating 10 million new jobs, I think that it's important to like be like what's from when is he talking about, because if he's talking about from right now when unemployment is like 10.2%, then like yeah, I mean jobs are just naturally going to be created as things start to reopen. But if he's talking about where we were pre-COVID, I think that's a pretty lofty goal, and I don't see how he'd be able to accomplish that. But it's just a pretty generic thing. You can't get at him too much. Like, I mean, I'm glad he's not saying like, oh, we're not going to create any jobs.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
think
yeah. Go ahead.
I think rather than the president saying this, this should be something that probably should be operated on a more local level where you actually get into the community and see what exactly is happening in the communities. Now, of course, the president himself isn't going to have the ability to get deep down into the details of all that. So I don't really think it's a reasonable promise the president could make.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really good point is what Carl said about like where do you measure it from, and that's what it kind of gets back to like almost the empty platitudes thing, because it's like you're never given a point from which it's just it's a promise, and it's not even him doing it in the first place, and nor in my opinion what I want it to be. Like I wouldn't want it to be just 10 million government jobs. I mean, I think that's a complete waste of time. So it's kind of, if these jobs are created under Trump, I mean the market is complicated, so it's just interesting. So the next one is create 1 million new small businesses. Again, that's not Trump doing it with a pen, nor would I want him to, but it's kind of the same thing. So Karl, so do you think the creation of small businesses under a president is, something to brag about, a good thing?
I think that is a positive thing. Like, if, say, small businesses were to be created, I think that would be a good thing. The problem is I don't see how he actually like plans on doing that, because like when there was the coronavirus relief package that was passed, there was unlimited amounts of money that could go to large corporations. But when it came to small businesses, they capped the amount of money that could go to small businesses, which is ironic because large corporations are doing very, very well right now, and small businesses are really, really hurting. And so I feel like this is super empty language where he's like, oh, I want to like create small businesses, even though like coming out of this pandemic, there are going to be a ton of small businesses that like never reopen, which is super unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about that, Anna Valtis?
Well, I think that just like with I agree with Carl on this point. Just like with Obama and Bush before him, a lot of the relief uh, focuses on large corporations, and people use the phrase "too big to fail" to refer to them. So there certainly is not an even-handed approach to this. Now, of course, with how many small businesses there are, it might actually be difficult to have an even-handed approach on this. But I would reemphasize my position that this probably should be handled more locally, so that you can actually measure in a more direct way what is happening and where the problems are and who needs help where and when. But when it concerns the idea of creating small businesses in general, I would say that obviously small businesses can only be created when there's an entrepreneur behind them. So this is something that, although you can point towards trends that would lead to the creation of more small businesses, I don't think that's really a guarantee you can make.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because yeah, you do, with a job, you actually can create a government job. I mean, you can't really create a government business. I mean, you can create a department, right? But you need entrepreneurial spirit or someone willing to take a risk to, create a small business in the first place. So yeah, and I guess it doesn't have to come at a local level. If that entrepreneur wants to go straight to starting like a big corporation, I guess that doesn't really happen though.
Where you're going
I
to have to find a lot of startup capital, and especially after the recent crisis, a lot of people are going to be short on that startup capital.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I just don't see how it's possible from a non like rhetorical perspective. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but it's just like it's just not the president that does that
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but
Yeah.
what I am saying is that if it happens, it will probably be less attributable to the president than to other factors.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. So for Karl, so the next one is cut taxes to boost take home pay and keep jobs in America. So what about the cutting taxes part?
So I think with that, you have to be like kind of specific about like what kind of
Yep.
taxes he's talking about cutting, because I know recently he signed that executive order about cutting the payroll tax. And the thing with that is if he did that, it would essentially defund Social Security, which would, I mean, hurt so many senior citizens, and talk about a demographic that's already being hit really hard by COVID. To just the idea of getting rid of Social Security at a time like this, I feel like is would be devastating. So it's important to talk about like what kind of taxes he's talking about. But if there's some sort of middle class tax cut, I mean, it's not the stimulus that I would most opt for, but I definitely think that the middle class needs relief right now, and any relief it can get, I think, is good.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Do you? So is that? I hadn't seen that somewhere. I mean, I'd seen the Social Security thing get kicked around, and I've seen Trump say that he definitely would not. I saw him say in some sort of tweet that he would not defund Social Security. I mean, that'd be pretty intense. Are you Anavoltis? What's your take on Social Security and whether that
Well,
should?
I believe Social Security is discussed in another point further down.
Oh, okay.
So if you'll
Yes, it
wait on that,
is.
Yeah,
maybe.
we
Yeah,
can
let's
save
just
that
wait
one
on that.
then.
Yeah, cool, cool. So
But
what about
but
the
in
cut of
general,
taxes?
in regards to tax cuts, obviously, in order to cut taxes, presumably you'd have to cut spending somewhere. But the way the deficit looks, I don't know exactly if the government is even operating on that principle. But the they're obviously getting money from various places. There's taxation, the sale of bonds, etc. But in order to cut taxes, you really need to examine where you should cut taxes and where that works best. So I think, in my view, I'd have to say again, on localizing things makes it a lot easier to tell where taxes can be cut and where that would impact things more or less.
So,
So
so
that's
the
my
next
position on that.
so the next two are kind of not one and the same, but they're both kind of two sides of the same coin. So it's enact fair trade deals that protect American jobs and made in America tax credits. So and Avoltus, that's kind of for lack of, would you call that protectionism?
Um, in regards to fair trade deals, it could be protectionism, it could be free trade, depending on what your opinion is on what a fair trade deal is. Now, in regards to Trump's administration, this certainly is a type of protectionism, and and of course, the phrase that protect American jobs does indeed imply protectionism. Now, the problem I have with protectionism, at least in the way that Donald Trump has handled it, for example, in regards to China, on tariffs on Chinese made goods, what China does is they simply use a third party to circumvent the tariffs, but also it impacts the quality of life of Americans by essentially artificially causing an inflation in price for various goods that could be cheaper if imported from abroad. So I think a better solution would be to change the way that we do business here in the US in order to make American made goods more affordable so that consumers will actually want to buy American made goods, especially if they're on a tight budget, which is actually a problem for a lot of the poorer people in this country. That if you uh, increase the prices on goods, then it makes it a lot more difficult for them to have financial mobility.
Okay. And so Carl, are you I don't even know what the whether that's whether you agree with that or is that something you would like to see as well, like actually before I even go to you, Carl, can you explain a little bit more, Voltus, what do you mean by like changing the way that we do business?
Well, for example, we mentioned regulations earlier. It could be argued that in a number of fields, regulations have been built up for a while without being streamlined. And for example, compiling regulations and streamlining them and reducing the amount of legal work that a lot of businesses have to do will actually reduce their expenditures, which will allow them to sell goods at a lower price. And it will also, in turn, make it easier for small businesses to enter into such fields and compete because they have to deal with less bureaucracy.
And so Carl, what are your thoughts on the on kind of what he's saying, and I guess we're tying them into the final 3 points of the jobs thing, the fair trade, made in America, and continue to deregulatory agenda for energy independence. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so basically, I think that Donald Trump, like a lot of the stuff he does, especially regarding war, he uses a lot of protectionist rhetoric. But when it comes to like what he actually does, that just hasn't been the case. Because I do actually think the American economy has been gutted by like things like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China. I think that we've lost so many jobs as a result. But I don't think that Donald Trump has really done anything to alleviate this. I know that during his first 2 years, like thousands of jobs were outsourced out of America. And so it's like he says a lot of stuff about like keeping American jobs here, but he doesn't. And that's the thing. He got rid of NAFTA, but then he created the USMCA, which I mean does effectively the same thing. I mean, we're still going to lose jobs under the USMCA. And so if he actually wants to it's also hard because I do think that we're just kind of even if you bring back some manufacturing jobs, I don't think that they come back in the same way that they were from before. You know what I mean? I have a hard time believing that the US economy is going to go back to this idea where like, you had these small towns where like people worked in a factory and that's just like I think that a lot of that, if it came back, it would be through automation. And so those jobs, we have to think about how we can rebuild those jobs in like other ways. And so I do like the idea of keeping American jobs, American made. I think that strengthens our economy, but I don't know if Trump's going to do it though. That's my thing on it.
Yeah, that's always the thing about about any type of election. It's like, I think it's I don't know who made it with this quote where it's like we campaign in poetry and we govern in prose or something like that. And I think it's kind of interesting. Let's move over to COVID-19. So it says to eradicate COVID-19. It's like with a stroke of a pen, Donald Trump's going to do it. But yeah, so let's go to Karl first. It says develop a vaccine by the end of 2020. What do you think?
I just call it wishful thinking. Like, I hope it happens. Like, I really hope it happens. But I don't know. And because also, like, I mean, it'd be a good thing if we developed a vaccine by the end of 2020. But then we have to talk about how we're going to mass produce that. We have to get it to everyone. And when a bunch of people just lost their jobs, which means they lost their healthcare, and they maybe don't have a source of income, it's going to be harder for them to get a vaccine. So yeah. I have a hard time seeing how this will actually come to pass. I hope it happens, though. I hope it does.
I mean, I'm completely anti-vax. And it's like it's fine. But it's just interesting. Even if I were, it's like you're trying to rush to get the first facelift. That's the kind of how I kind of like think about it. Like the first round of any technology is a train wreck. I mean, if you want to get the first whatever, great, have fun. I'm not gonna be in the first like generations of anything. Like, I mean, this shit's poison. So I don't think it's a good thing. I want this to happen in like the year 2300.
You know what? I agree somewhat with that point. Obviously, the first batch of the vaccine might have problems in it. And that's why there's clinical trials. I have some insider information on this. I can't tell you what company because there's stock prices involved. But they are in clinical trials right now for potential vaccines. And there's multiple companies in multiple countries doing it. And obviously they're all competing to get the contract to put out a vaccine and to make an effective vaccine that would help. Now, the question would be, is this a situation like smallpox where you can get a one-time vaccine and it'll last you for a long time? Or is it a situation like the flu where there's many different strains and where immunity is fleeting and where very frequently you might be in a situation that it might actually, you can get sick anyway. There's a 50-50 chance or something in some cases. So,
yeah, I mean, I just think it's very interesting that it's like talking about rushing it being a good thing. Most of the time,
it's not that they're rushing it because there was already work for coronavirus vaccines due to previous SARS and MERS outbreaks. So there was obviously some research, but it was sort of going slow. But now what's happened is companies that were working on other pharmaceuticals have essentially devoted their whole time on developing this particular vaccine. And when I say developing pharmaceuticals, I'm talking about in the research area of pharmaceuticals. So it's not as if there's some sort of other pharmaceutical that is coming out that is being delayed or uh, denied because this is in the research stage. So they don't have something yet, but they're hoping that they have something.
Okay. And so the next one is this is another one. It's just like, how do you measure this? It says return to normal in 2021. So what do you think about that, Carl?
I mean, I think that is incredible. I just don't think that that's gonna happen. I
What
don't
is
think.
normal? Like, do you like that's the thing that makes me laugh. It's just like you can't measure this, so it's like you can just say it, and life is fine if you're a politician. So you don't, but you don't think like whatever the version that we've agreed on is normal is not going to happen in 2020.
Yeah, even I mean, I think probably the most charitable definition would be everything is back open. I think
Yeah.
that would be the most charitable definition of it.
Cool.
I can't see that happen. I can't see people going to concerts in 2021. At least not the same rate that they were before. With any of this stuff, I can't see any of that. Oh, and just on the vaccination note, I think people should get vaccinated. I just would like to. We don't have to have that debate, but people should get vaccinated.
Great. I don't. Awesome. Keep going.
But yeah, anyway, I don't think that it's not going to be back to normal in 2021. That's a good goal, I guess. I hope that things are closer to normal than not. But
yeah,
I don't want to be partisan and say, oh, because Trump did it, like, oh, it's not. But it's just, I just don't think that that's like realistic.
That's really gonna happen either way. So, but you would say that like things opening up, yeah, anything closer to something being concrete would make me feel better. It's not about whether it happens or not. It's just I get really, really like I got my like goggles on for like if something doesn't have a definition and if something can't be measured. I'm just like, okay, that's probably some bullshit from whoever's saying it.
Well,
so
this is very common with Trump. He does say a lot of things like this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So return to normal in 2021. What do you think about that, Anavoltis?
Well, it's a very common phrase, a sort of appeal to normalcy or an appeal to the good old times. A lot of politicians, especially conservative ones, try to rely on this. Now, Donald Trump isn't really that much of a conservative, so I guess he's just really pulling into the Republican Party on that one. But how do you measure that?
How do you measure? Yeah, cool. The next one is make all critical medicines and supplies for healthcare workers in the United States. So that's kind of tying back to the Made in America type stuff. But would you like to see that, Anavoltis?
Critical medicines and supplies for healthcare workers in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing that I think it is important to have critical supplies for is in the case of a potentially hostile country. So if trade breaks down with China or Russia, we don't want to rely on them for something. Now, in regards to the private sector or just in general health, I think we can be more open on that. But in the case of the military, at the very least, I would say we definitely would need to ensure that we have a self-reliance in that sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a big. I mean, a lot of people were saying it before coronavirus, but basically, I think that hit a lot of people like a ton of bricks when we realized how much of our pharmaceuticals we were getting from just China, and it's kind of scary. I mean, I personally would like to move towards a society that just doesn't need drugs as much, rather than saying that we need to make drugs at home. I get that a lot of people do need drugs, but like our reliance on them is one side of the coin, and who we get it from and where we make them is the other side. So I hope that we at least don't. It's not such a big monopoly or whatever, whether that be from 20 different countries or all at home. But I think that's our reliance on that was really, really scary. And then there was the whole, I don't know if the dam in China is still going on, but they're talking about almost the entire health or pharmaceutical sector of China was in the path of this like flood. So that would I don't know. That's what I think one of the problems with relying on globalism is. But and then the next one is I'm kind of assuming that Karl, you would like to see us make more of our own stuff, because you've said that like small businesses like making stuff American made would benefit America. So I'll just do you have anything else to add on that?
No, yeah, I think that we don't want our supply chains to be as reliant on China as they've been proved to be. So yeah.
Yeah, China. All right. So it says refill stockpiles and prepare for future pandemics. I don't know, kind of more of the same. I think they create these pandemics, but this show is not about me and my takes. People can watch my morning show. I talk about this stuff all the time. Um, but it kind of more of the same. Yeah, I guess we can probably just like skip that one because if there's going to be a next pandemic, we probably need to be prepared for it. So we're going to keep moving. And it's kind of more the same with the next one. End our reliance on China. So and the first one is jobs. So do you? I don't know. I guess either you guys can jump in here. I don't know at what level we rely on China. Do you guys know to what level we actually do in terms of we get a lot of stuff from them. We get a lot of medicine from them. And you guys want to weigh in on how bad things have gotten with our
I mean,
reliance
when
on
it
them?
comes to consumer goods, we're incredibly dependent on China for a lot of things, and I think that that's why it's become kind of like that's why I talked about permanent normal trade relations with China. I think that that ultimately was probably not a good thing, and the idea was that like, oh, we open up trade relations with China and we end up liberalizing China. China becomes this flourishing democracy, and they become like that. But that's not what happened. China just built itself up, and now they're a world superpower,
Yeah.
and we're super dependent on them and have a ton of debt owed to them.
Mm. And Avaltus?
Well, I think that one of the reasons why we trade so much in China is because of the exceedingly cheap labor in China. Now, of course, I think we can remediate that by advancing newer technologies in manufacturing and such things that could give us an edge in that, or we could streamline regulations to reduce various costs for businesses operating in the US. But yes, we do rely on China in a number of different ways. One example would be rare earth metals, which are used in cell phones, for example. A lot of that is mined in China. China, as a country, has some of the most abundant natural resources in the whole world. And it's no surprising that until the 19th century, practically the rest of the world was in a trade deficit with China. So,
I didn't know that. You said until the 19th century?
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's throwback, man. Yeah, I don't remember those decades so well. Yeah, I didn't even know that there was kind of. Are you talking about like the Silk Road? Like
Yeah, Silk Road
wow.
and sea trade. Uh, it became a huge problem, and that's why at the time the British were not cracking down on the opium trade, was because that was one of the few ways in which they actually had a trade advantage over China, and that's what eventually led to the Opium Wars.
Wow, that's very very interesting. So I mean, like the reliance on China ones are just bring back 1 million manufacturing jobs, tax credits for companies that bring back jobs from China, allow 100% expensing deductions from essential industries like pharmaceuticals and robotics. No federal contracts, excuse me, for companies who outsource to China and hold China fully accountable for allowing the virus to spread around the world. So I mean, we're kind of let's condense those first four into one because that's just more of I don't know I don't know whether to call like it protectionism, but it's just putting your own country first. And we've kind of already said that we would like a little bit more of that. But let's go to Karl with this last one. Hold China fully accountable for allowing the virus to spread throughout the world. So we'll go to Karl first, and then we'll go to Anna Voltus. But I don't, I don't. There's a lot of theories on whether they let it happen. Whether what's your take on how accountable China needs to be held for the coronavirus?
I mean, I guess I would want to know what does being held accountable mean. I know that some U.S. senators have talked about like potentially suing China for like the damages that they've caused. I can't imagine that would go anywhere. I know that some people, I hope very hesitantly, have brought up like military action. I think that would be devastating. That would literally hurt the world so much. I don't want us to move into a place where we are entering some sort of new Cold War with China. I think that would be really, really bad. And so while I do think that I wish that we weren't as reliant on China, it's just a fact of reality now that they are a superpower. They are a global superpower, and I think that we can either depend, So I think that we don't want to be antagonistic towards them, I guess, in the way where we don't want things to escalate.
if it was proven that they let's go complete, like they did it on purpose, they planned it for a decade, they sent like, what would you say would be the right course of there's not that much recourse in international law at a certain point because they can just not do it. If they're strong enough, they could just not pay. Like, I don't know how like suing countries internationally would go. But like, what would you do? You said definitely not a military thing. I definitely agree. Um, but let's say they unleashed a bioweapon on America. What would you do?
I mean, that's tough. I mean, all right. So let's just get out of the way. I don't think that that's what happened. But
Yeah,
let's play the hypothetical
yeah,
game
yeah,
that they did.
uh-huh.
I still don't think that aggressive action. I mean, I would like to see more. I mean, it's already incredibly like disgusting, like what's happening with the Uyghur camps over in China. Like those are just horrific. And so I do think that there are some serious like. It's just hard how you do it. Like, how do you put pressure? Because the tariff war, that was a disaster. Like that, the war that Trump tried to do with China regarding tariffs, that didn't go well at all. And so I honestly, I don't know what the proper response to something like that would be, because I don't think that like, oh, because when you have that kind of rhetoric, like, oh, they caused it, they released it on the U.S. Like, one, I don't see how they specifically did it on the U.S. I mean, it seems like the whole world.
The burden of proof is very high.
Yeah, and
Like you have to prove. Yeah, you have to like, what's the evidence or whatever. But yeah, so Anavoltis, what do you think about that last one? Do you think China did that? What would you like to see happen? How would you solve that as the American government?
Well, first of all, I think one thing that we can be justifiably upset at the Chinese government over is the dishonesty with which they handled the situation in regards to the virus. However, I don't think we can hold them accountable for it spreading to the world, because under that standard would have to fully close our borders every time flu season came around. And I don't think that's a reasonable standard to hold. Now, in regards to actually putting pressure on China, I don't think that the tariffs are working, as China has clearly circumvented them using proxies like Vietnam. And I also don't think that sanctions would work very well. And I suppose the only real effective solution, and this is scary for a lot of people, would be to actually spring the so-called Thucydides Trap early and take on China in full conflict while we have the advantage. And I actually
Nice.
sent a letter to the Department of State uh, advocating for this.
Whoa. Oh, awesome. Okay, keep talking about that. Not awesome. Like, I necessarily agree with it, but I'm always open to having my mind changed. But like, tell us about this. You said you sent a letter to the Department of State.
Yeah,
Amazing.
but obviously I'm just some random guy, so
Yeah.
I don't think they took it very seriously.
Right.
But essentially, the situation, the Thucydides trap, is a situation where you have two powers, uh, a dominant power like the U.S. and an emerging power like China, and China is very clearly expanding militarily. Um, and establishing military bases in various other countries. And it seems like the US has already antagonized China in a number of different ways, including supporting the Hong Kong protests through NGOs anyway. But it, we are already in a state of Cold War with China in that sense. So I think a hot war with China is practically inevitable. So in regards to how we handle it, I say that the sooner is probably better than later, because China is building up precisely for this situation. So it
Yeah.
is important to take the advantage. And if we take the advantage as soon as possible, we can have a limited war as opposed to a total war, because we'll have the logistical advantage.
This was definitely one of the ones that I was the most interested in, and because like, you know, both of you guys would not like what Trump is doing in like opposite ways. Like, you're talking about like going to war with China, and Karl, you're talking about to not be antagonistic with China. So here's the question I have for Karl. Um, if if Anna Voltus was running the government, what would you do? Would you protest? Like Anavolta's running the government. We're going to war with China. Okay, we're going to war. What would you do? Would you protest it? Would you?
I would heavily protest it. I would be
Yeah,
as opposed to that. I am as opposed to that as possible. I mean, hundreds of millions of people would die, not just people that are in the military. Like innocent people would be slaughtered in that. I mean, not from just Chinese population, from our population. I mean, that I don't understand. Wait, I really I don't like. I get what you're talking about with the Thucydides trap. Um, I don't understand. You said that it's inevitable though that we go to war
Yes.
with China. How is that inevitable?
It has to do with how power dynamics work in international relations.
But we
That
never went to war with Britain when they like kind of passed the torch to us regarding the
well,
number one
that's
world
because
power.
Britain was weakened severely by wars with other countries. Although for a time the U.S. actually did make frequent war plans for the potential of a war with Britain, although the likelihood of that seemed low. So, in essence, unless China gets into a major war with India, the U.S. will probably have to eventually face China. And China is currently, in its foreign policy, focusing on isolating India and diverting trade away from India through the various ports that it is leasing that are strategically positioned. So ultimately, I think that whenever a power gets to a certain point, the Thucydides trap idea is that war becomes inevitable as long as both powers are strong, because one power will, in its growth, threaten the position of the other power.
and you
I mean,
just see
that's
that
still
as.
that. Or
Can I just jump in for just 1 second? So you just to get it, you see that as a foregone conclusion in what time frame?
It probably isn't going to happen within the next few years, although that would be the ideal time frame from our side to fight a war, because China's economy is growing at a large rate. But it, it's very hard to place a time frame on this
Yeah.
because you never know exactly what's going to happen. Maybe there is going to be a big revolt in China, but if China's law enforcement has any decent effectiveness, then that's probably going to be prevented. So
Karl, what were you gonna say?
Oh, well, I mean, I still don't really understand why. I mean, if we look at just China, as China has grown, they've been much more inclined to use soft power in their expansion than hard power, like the US has been inclined to. We've used a lot of hard power in our expansion, with our like wars in the Middle East and what we've done in Latin America. So I still don't really understand other than like, I mean, can you like d- besides, this idea that it's inevitable, can you tell me like why you think it's inevitable?
it's the reason why it is inevitable is because the US has such a dominance in international politics and international relations that it means that as China grows, and China does intend to grow, at least from what we see within China, it will naturally come up against US foreign policy. And we're already seeing this in Hong Kong, where we see a lot of American support for the Hong Kong protesters. And obviously, that doesn't sit well with China. The US is backing Taiwan to some extent, which doesn't sit well with China either. So, in that sense, we already have an opposition, and it's only a matter of time until that opposition will need to be resolved.
Mm.
And if we wait too long, then China will move from a position of exercising soft power to a position of exercising hard power. And the reason why they aren't in that position is because currently they are weaker.
Mm. If I may, so is it kind of an issue of it's just war or physical conflict is just an extension of the conflict already going on, and as space and resources kind of, and just like you said, power dynamics, it it's inevitable because it's always inevitable between big players.
Yes, we
um
see this very frequently in history.
yeah, it's like every single time there's like two or three. You almost don't have to look at you can kind of shoot blind. You don't have to look at the USA's situation and the China situation as much as you know that these are the two big players on the stage. And if you look at like wars going back for the history of war, it always happens, especially when it's on an economic level. Like the economic thing is always before the physical conflict. So it
Well, it necessarily has to be, because why would you
yes.
attack someone if you're in a weaker position? It doesn't make sense. You'd
Do
want to
you see?
avoid war as much as possible.
I'll let me kick it back to Anavoltis for a second, then we'll go to you, Karl. Do you say? Do you think China, like attacking America, is inevitable, or do you? Oh, did you freeze for a
Oh,
second?
I think we might have lost him.
Yeah, I think we lost him. So why don't you say what you're going to
What?
say, and I'll try to.
I'm here.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, it froze for a second, man.
Maybe I was just being
Oh,
too still.
just being very stoic. So, do you think China attacking the U.S. is inevitable? Down the line at some point, or do you think that China can just keep doing its own thing and get more powerful, and the conflict would have to be started by us at some point? I guess it's hard to know. It's hard to know the future. But I'm just wondering you know, how one seeing the first shot being fired. So can you talk about that for a second, Anna Voltis?
Well, essentially, it really depends on whether on how much in the way the U.S. is to China, because if China can become the number one country in the world without having to fight the U.S. directly, then they'll do it because they'll have an advantage in doing so. However, as things stand, that's not likely to happen because the U.S. does have a strong presence in the waters near and around China. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why China is expanding military bases away from its shore. Because unlike the US, which has two large shores from which it can operate on, China really has the one long shore that it can operate from, which gives the US a distinctive advantage in essentially being at the current point anyway, you could say the away player in a war, in the sense that the war would primarily revolve around Chinese territory because the US has an advantage on the seas.
Yes.
So,
And globally, yeah.
yes.
More bases abroad, things like that. Oh,
Yeah, and
interesting.
of course, China's trying to expand into Africa, and in fact, I think almost all African countries have some form of U.S. aid in military form.
Mm.
So the U.S. subsidizes most militaries in the world in some way. So, in that sense, any expansion that China is making will necessarily have to interfere with our own alliance system.
Mm. So Karl, why don't you just say what you're going to say before any closing thoughts on the China? Then we'll move on to healthcare, and we're going to stay with you for the first couple points.
Sounds good. No, so I guess my biggest argument as to why I don't think that it's going to go to a full scale conflict is I would point to, so after World War II, we saw the devastating impacts of what atomic weapons could do with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's why we didn't see the Cold War with the Soviet Union turn into a hot war, is because both sides knew that if it did get like that, because I agree that, throughout history, when there have been these two dominant powers, there has usually been a passing of the guard in the way of conflict. But there has also never been a form of destruction as nuclear weapons have been. That's never existed before, where both sides knew that they would lose tremendous amounts of civilians, not just soldiers and people who has decided to fight. And so that's kind of my main argument, because the Soviet Union and the U.S. did not go engage in full scale conflict. Just it was an economic war, and one side collapsed. And there were a ton of proxy wars, but I mean it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, that would be the one huge example. Yeah, where it actually never got hot. That's very very interesting. So let's stay with let's go over to healthcare now. So there's price controls. Like it says, healthcare cut prescription drug prices, put patients and doctors back in charge of our healthcare system, lower healthcare insurance premiums. So let me just go over to Karl. So are you a fan of the government controlling prices on the healthcare in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see the government do more in the way of reducing the prices of prescription drugs because I think most people can agree that the price of prescription drugs is outrageous. I think the point that he makes when he says put patients and doctors back in charge of healthcare, I get like what he's trying to get at with that, but I think that where Donald Trump wants us to go, that would move us in a direction where insurance companies have control of the healthcare system, not patients and doctors. If you want, doctors have a bigger input in healthcare, you would move more towards a socialized medical system, such as Medicare for All or something like the NHS has, or England has with the NHS.
And Avoltis, do you agree with that or no?
Um, well, I think that it really depends on the situation. So, because of this, I'm in favor of decentralization on this to a local level where if particular needs exist in a community, then they can be provided for within the context of that community or the context of voluntary cooperation between communities. Um, but in regards to just the way healthcare has been handled recently, I used to do taxes, especially in the era of the Affordable Care Act. And in that process, I think that the healthcare mandate in the Affordable Care Act is a big problem, and especially to a lot of poor people, in my experience, as having done taxes for them, it is sometimes a bit of a nightmare, especially in the way that you have to calculate the healthcare premiums for if someone didn't have insurance. It ends up being the highest of two different numbers, and you have to really pry into a number of personal questions on people in order to do the due diligence. You have to take notes on everything they say, and you have to ask specifically what kind of insurance they had, for which months, and for every member of the household. So it's a lot of information that some people might not have available at the time, but it also is a big cost for people who might not be interested in purchasing insurance. And one of the worst things I think about it is that the the penalty for violating the mandate, or the tax as it is, went up each year by a significant amount as it went forward, as it was calculated. So I think it was mostly a problem for low income people.
And this is specifically the part of Obamacare that
Yes, the healthcare mandate.
yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Carl?
I mean, I don't think Obamacare was perfect. I think that it had some good things. I think the expansion of Medicaid was good. I think the protection for people with pre-existing conditions, I think that that was good. But I mean, ultimately, I do think that something like Obamacare is going to have a ton of problems because it was basically just a massive giveaway to health insurance companies. And so that's why I don't think that this like in between game that the US is trying to play with healthcare, where it's like not private, not, fully socialized. It's just like this weird thing where health insurance companies control the whole game. We got to fix it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree that it's kind of like it seems like the the insurance thing in general seems like a little bit of a scam. But I don't know. Tend to say that about things I don't understand. I really don't understand health insurance of like why it's necessary at the level that it's at. Like I don't get the system, and I want to get. I had a doctor on last year to try to explain it to me who works works with insurance a lot.
Yeah.
I want to do it again, but I don't get the whole thing.
Yeah, and again, I'll say that my preferred solution is to leave it up to communities as to which system they think it's better, whether they prefer private solutions or single payer solutions within the community.
Right. And that's why I think that decentralization and localization, it's kind of the most moral too, because like you can have government guaranteed healthcare if it's on the local level and the people buy into it. But like, some people don't want government healthcare. Like I don't. So I would never vote for it, even if I thought it was the right thing for most people. Wouldn't vote for it for myself, but I'm shit out of luck if I, if it's one system, I'm just shit out of luck, which is, it doesn't make sense to me. But like, so it says, end surprise billing. I don't really know. I don't. There's no other comments in the Trump thing about like rent or anything like that. But it's kind of more of the same for me. I don't really know what surprise billing is, other than billing that's done by surprise. I don't know if it's like a special term or like some kind of insurance term. But it's like the same thing where they're talking about canceling rent or off-putting credit card debt. I kind of just don't really like it on principle in the first place. I think you should have to pay what you owe at the time that you're supposed to pay it. So I don't know what that means by surprise, but and what do you guys, Anavoltis, what do you think about that? The whole like, exceptions because of COVID or that type of thing.
Exceptions because of the SARS coronavirus. In regards,
Yeah, I mean that's the reason that people have been talking about like being exempt from rent and stuff like that. I don't know if the ending surprise billing is because of coronavirus, but it's kind of the same argument to me, where it's like all of a sudden you owed something, now because of extenuating circumstances you don't. That doesn't sit right with me. What about you?
well, I think a big problem is that our current monetary policy heavily discourages liquidity. So even if people have a decent amount of money, they're not going to generally have it available for an emergency. So I think that's one problem. Another problem is that because of the discouragement of liquidity, a lot of companies and individuals choose, or by necessity of inflation, end up not having money around for such emergencies. So what I think is that people should plan ahead more, and our monetary policy should reflect this. So I think that we should
Wow,
reduce
good
the
way of putting it,
inflation
man.
rate so
Yeah.
that we don't have such a problem happening with lack of liquidity in a lot of people.
And that can come, yeah, you can't, that has to come from every angle. It has to come from people's choices, from the government being more responsible. That's very interesting. I like the way you put that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I think businesses also should, in a way, try to be responsible in this way, not just individuals. I'm not saying that we can't forgive people for not having the money, because if you want to forgive someone for not having the money, I think that's fine. But what I think is, generally speaking, we should create a situation where the government doesn't discourage people from not having money. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. What do you think about that, Carl?
I mean, I guess I get like the in theory what Anavoltis is saying, but I don't think that people should have to pay anything for medical care in this country. I mean, it's like we're one of the only developed countries in the entire world where people have to pay medical expenses, and I don't think that that should be a thing. People go bankrupt here because of medical bills, and especially I think that the flaws in our system are really being highlighted right now, where a lot of people, because other developed countries, they're doing pretty good right now. Actually, the coronavirus, some of them are perfectly back to normal. I know, like in Denmark and stuff, they're like, I know people commented last time I was on here that I talked about Denmark too much, but they're doing great right now despite the pandemic and everything. And that's because when people are sick there, they can go to the doctor and they can get treatment, they can get preventative care,
Yeah,
and they don't have to worry about going bankrupt or having this surprise billing or any of that stuff.
yeah. And Baltus, I have a question for you. So, just from a philosophical standpoint, do you think that saying we're the only country or one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have socialized medicine, is that an argument? Like, is that a good philosophical argument?
Oh, just for clarification, that is not
Yeah.
my argument, but we can.
Oh, well, either way, whether it's yours or someone else, I'm wondering if it is an argument, like
Well,
from like a principled philosophical standpoint.
well, if you think that it is an absolute right for everyone to have, and that it is the government's responsibility to provide for that right, then it is an argument, and then would have to debate as to whether it is a right and whether it is the government's primary responsibility. But on my personal view on this, as I said earlier, I'm in favor of a decentralized system where you can have some communities that want to have a single payer centralized uh, medical system can have that, and other communities that want to be fully privatized can have that, and communities that want mixed systems or perhaps other solutions can have that as well. And then we won't have people protesting about uh, too much healthcare or not enough healthcare, and we'll actually have multiple systems operating, and we'll be able to see them compete in a similar sphere, and we'll actually be able to improve systems more effectively by having multiple applications of them in the same system.
Okay. So let's go back to Karl. So the reason I just went to Anavoltis and I was going to come back to you is like, so that's not your biggest argument. I mean, it's one of the like 3 or 4 things that you said, but what would you say is you have to pick one argument for why America should have I don't know how, like, universal healthcare or socialized medicine, whatever the term is, like the system that you want. What is the most compelling argument according to
Yeah,
you?
no, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is I think that there are like 80 bazillion arguments as to why
Yeah.
it's better. So I would never make just one argument. I think
Yeah,
the
you have
biggest
to.
thing is
I'm putting you on the spot.
less
Just one.
people would die from lack of healthcare. I think that this is like there's so many people that die here from not having access to medical care, and that's just not something that happens in other developed nations.
Is that why they die?
Yes.
Not their choices.
There are people that die because they don't have access to healthcare.
No,
yes.
I'm not asking if people die. I'm asking if so many people die.
It's thousands of people every year.
But only because they don't have access to healthcare.
Yeah.
So they're going along the street and their cause of death is not having healthcare.
I mean, the cause of, I mean, if they had received treatment, they would be still alive, I guess is what
I would love for you to send me some stuff on that, because like,
sure.
the thing is like the you don't have to do it now. Oh, not right now, because
okay.
Because what I'll, if it's what I'll do, I'll read it and have you back on or something like that. But I would love to just see like a thing that says here's the reason I'm bringing this up, because Anavoltis brought this up earlier, and I think it's an interesting thing to talk about with like a Democrat or whatever, is like the level of like invasive life auditing has to happen in order to like get this kind of stuff right. Anavoltis talked about it earlier, of having to ask people a bunch of questions, and you have to ask them things they might not have the information available, they might not have all kinds of things. But the idea, like, when someone says someone died for a reason, the burden of proof is on that person making that claim that they died for that reason, and saying that someone died from lack of healthcare is an extremely high burden of proof.
Yeah.
Would you I want to see Anavoltis, do you agree with that? Because the thing is, like, Anavoltis, you become my like de facto philosophic. I put philosophical questions to you that I don't quite understand from, like, so do you think that the burden of proof is on the person making that claim, and is that a high burden of proof?
Well, I think it depends, because obviously there are some people that are too poor to afford healthcare. And some of these people may have entered this situation by chance, some of them may have entered it by consequence of their decisions, but I'm not going to make a distinction here between that. But in regards to whether it is something that should be avoided, it really has to. I think, as I mentioned earlier, you have to really get into the question of whose responsibility is this in particular, in the sense that, are we going to place the responsibility on the central government? Are we going to place it on the surrounding community? Are we going to replace it to place it on anybody that's in the immediate vicinity that could have helped? I think it really depends on where exactly you want to place the responsibility.
And Karl, where do you?
So I mean, I think what you're trying to get at is, like, I said that, oh, they die because they didn't have access to healthcare, but then you would say something like, oh, well, they shouldn't have had a bunch of Twinkies their whole life. And
Well,
then
no, that's not.
or
I'm
maybe that's a simplification, but like, or what are you
Well,
getting at? I guess when you say that that's
talking
not
about
actually.
me or Anavoltis.
Well, the reason I said was that I'm not going to make a distinction there between whether it was their choice or by chance, was because I'm saying that I'm actually not going to factor that into the question, at least in this particular argument.
It's the
What I am saying,
responsibility that matters.
what I am saying is, whose responsibility is it to ensure that they get the care? Is it the central government's responsibility? Is it the community's responsibility? Is it the responsibility of any passerby, or is it their own responsibility? Is it God's responsibility? We really have to define that before we can say who is culpable, if there's any culpability.
Yeah, I mean that actually does a good job of making it a little bit simpler, because my point is not. Now I would make that argument if I saw Karl. By the way, I would make that argument if I saw someone housing Twinkies all day. But I'm not making that argument as a broad stroke. I'm saying that it would be a mistake to make a broad stroke, because there's so many different people. It would be equally. It would not. Well, I haven't measured it, but like it would in virtually equally like foolish to say blame Twinkies or to blame lack of coverage. I think that like there's Twinkies, there's the Twinkie folk, and there's lack of coverage folk, and both camps are doing the same thing, and that is painting with a broad brush. But in a weird way, in a cool way, Anavoltis just circumvented it, because he was saying that the kind of the reason. Let's just not worry about that for a little bit and worry about almost the morality of it, of who does it fall on. And to me, that's kind of what I was getting back to, is like the burden of proof falls on the person making the claim. And if someone's making the claim that it should be centralized, you're making the claim that it's the centralized government's responsibility to do it, which I think is ludicrous. I don't think it's not apparent to me that it's the centralized government's responsibility to look after healthcare. So that's all I'm saying. But for sure, people need to eat less Twinkies. For sure. I just don't know them. That's my point about all of it, where it's like you'd have to life audit. You would have to audit like every single person, and that is.
And again, there's also a difference between saying that it's somebody's responsibility and obligation,
Right. Yeah.
and saying that people would do it anyway, even if it wasn't their obligation. For example, recently I heard a story of a doctor who performed a 12-hour surgery on some guy, and he wasn't getting paid. It was a charity case. So I think that if we leave it to the community, then we can decide whether or not it is an obligation or whether it is a charity, without having to go on to the whole big national level of it's everybody's business. Because I don't really think it is everybody's business in the whole country what is happening to someone in one town. I think it's a lot more immediate to the people in the immediate surroundings. And I think that's where the best and most informed decisions can be made.
Cool. All right, sweet. And I got the link you just sent over, Karl. And what I'll do is what I always do when people send me it, I'll spend about an hour of it on my solo show, and if I'll research into it, give it a fair shake, and make some progress or whatever. Let's move over to education. So let's stay with Karl. It says provide school choice to every child in America. Agree or disagree?
So yeah, I think that school choice, just in general, isn't really the right solution, because I think that it's because the argument that's usually made is, so say you're some poor family, and because of school vouchers, you can choose to go to a better school. And my problem with that is it doesn't really do anything for the kids that are left at the bad school. There's still unless everyone suddenly left that school, which isn't what happens in situations where vouchers are implemented. So yeah, I don't think that school choice is the way to fix our education system. And also the Teach American exceptionalism, I think that's I don't see how that is not influencing politics into infusing politics with.
I think we can probably spend a long time in that one. Let's stay with school choice for a second, because that's another one of them. Like we'll get to American. I have a lot of thoughts on that one, but so school choice, I don't know. Let's go over to Anavoltus first. So providing school choice to every child in America.
So,
Karl brings up the like whether it'll work a lot. What about a moral perspective? Do you think that's moral to do that?
oh, you're asking me?
I'm asking you. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to just describe real quick. So, as I understand it, school choice is the idea that if there's two public schools in two different districts, you would have the choice to send your child to the one in the other district, in the neighboring district, even if that's not in your district. And that would be an example of school choice, at least as I understand it.
School choice is basically the funds follow you, whether that's to a public school, private school, or homeschool. It's that the funds go with the kid rather than with the school.
Well, what I think is that I think education has been somewhat too centralized in a number of different ways, especially when we're talking about younger children. So, while I'm not morally opposed to the idea of public schools, what I think is that if we decentralize the system, we can actually see a greater competition in effectiveness of schooling and also various solutions to schooling problems. And if different communities want to cooperate on funding a common school system voluntarily, and if they want to allow children to go into and their parents to choose which school in that system to go to, I think that's something that they can do. But I don't think that our current system, which is centralized, really does very much in the sense of competitive schooling, at least when it regards the quality of education.
Okay. So let's go over to the American exceptionalism thing now. I mean, I've had a problem with this term for years, for a very, very long time, since like 2005 or so, 2006, because I don't really know what it is. I've always just been like, America is a nation. A nation is a nation, and you're exceptional or not based on what you do, where you are. So it just never made sense to me. It's like a rah rah thing or whatever. So depending on the definition, I would I would be down with teaching it, but that is more of a I just want these things known as good and bad, right and wrong to be taught. And if America happens to be, you know, in the top 50 at a certain point, you can say certain things that American does is exceptional. So I approach it from purely like a competence perspective, not a go America. If it's go America, it better be true. If it's not, then there's certain things about America I don't want to be taught as exceptional, like invading other countries. You know, but what do you think, Karl? What do you see as American exceptionalism, and why do you not want it taught?
I just want to say, I think that that is a really good way of putting it. Like, if we want to be objective about it, if we want to like objectively say the U.S. has the highest GDP in the world, that's true. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it's like I like what like because if you just say like, oh, we're just the best at everything we do and we're never wrong, that leads to disaster every time.
Yes.
So I actually
Or
really,
always,
really like the way you
or
put that.
always wrong.
Yeah, or always wrong, or
Yeah,
always wrong.
any of that. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah, so I thoroughly agree.
Yeah. So, but keep. So, why do you not want it? Why do you not want it taught though? Like, I mean, let me play a little devil's advocate. If you maintain a position of strength, even slightly dishonest strength, from inside of your ranks, you can improve morale. You can improve unity. And I'm not even making my own argument because I'm a truth guy. But that would be the argument. So if those things would strengthen your national spirit, your morale, those would be good things. Why do you not want those things to be taught?
So, I mean, I guess I don't have a problem with teaching pride in the country. I don't think that that's a good thing. I guess it's the notion of teaching that we're exceptional and that we are, always correct in what we do, or that, like, we're somehow above other nations. I like to think of the US as a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And so I think that it's important that, like, because then, I mean, from the morale argument, because I do kind of get what you're saying, that if you teach that to people, it does like boost their morale. But if that's not true, because if we get circle back to truth, then that morale can kind of be crushed if they grow up and they realize, they say they travel the world and they're like, oh wait, it's not as good other places, or maybe they don't like us in other places. You know what I mean? So I think that that's how I would kind of combat that argument.
Yeah. Yeah. I just it's kind of like the biblical principle: a house divided against itself cannot stand. And if the it's kind of, there is a certain point at which too much criticism from inside of an entity will subvert that entity and it will fall. That is for that's power dynamics right there. Like think about a family. There's a certain level of internal strife that you just cannot deal with. So let's go over to Anavoltis. Do you think that what do you think American exceptionalism should be taught, and do you agree with what I'm saying about a certain level of unity must be maintained?
Well, I personally don't agree with the idea of American exceptionalism,
I
at
think
least
none of
not
us
in,
do.
in the
Yeah,
ways that I've heard it formulated.
yeah.
I think it's very frequently a somewhat vague quality. I think that while it is true that the U.S. currently is the world hegemon on top of the world, I don't think that that's a position that we should expect to be unique in the long term. I think eventually the U.S. will fall, and just like any other country, and then another country will rise that is powerful. So in that sense, I don't see the idea as being warranted. Now, some people like to approach it from a theological perspective. I don't think it's warranted from that perspective either. Although I'm not going to get into that because this is a more politics discussion. But in regards to what you said, teaching morals in schools, um, I'm not really interested in at least uh, government schooling teaching morals in that sense because as a religious person, that's where I get my morals from, and I don't think that institutionalizing them in the state is a very good idea. So in that sense, I don't think that that would work. But to the other question that you had asked, in regards to unity, while I think that certainly a degree of I guess you could call it indoctrination would produce unity. I'm not really interested in unity for unity's sake. I'm not in favor of indoctrination in that sense. I think that the effectiveness of a system will bear out in its success and also in the people's appreciation for it. Not necessarily all the time. I think that sometimes people can be wrong about things. But if a system is generally effective and if it enriches the people within it to some degree, people will support it, although not always. But that's generally how it works. So, in that sense, I think that rather than speaking with words, we should lead through actions.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I just put in the chat that someone was asking what country is exceptional then, and I kind of put that's our point. Like behaviors are exceptional, not countries. I mean, every single country is going to have if you're about merit, if you're about competence, you have to acknowledge that that I don't know. Like honestly, we kind of have to stop talking about it if we're not gonna go to like a religious standpoint, because you could get into ordained authority. Things can be exceptional, like if we get into the God thing, I guess. But like it's behaviors. It's like saying there's an exceptional person, but if you put Tiger Woods on the basketball court and Michael Jordan on the golf course, these are not exceptional people. These are exceptional performers in their specific field, and that's how I feel about nations too. Cool. Let's go to drain the swamp. So I feel like so we have about 20 or 30 minutes left right now, so we're gonna speed up just a little bit with these kind of like rapid fire ones or whatever. So Karl, are you a fan of congressional term limits?
Yes,
You are.
very
Okay.
much so.
Yeah, me too. Anna Voltus?
100% opposed.
Opposed. Oh, explain.
Well, I think that congressional term limits essentially treats a symptom and not the cause. In the sense that why would we need congressional term limits? Well, because there's people getting reelected that might not be the best. And why are people getting reelected that might not be the best? Because people are voting for them. So if you're saying that the people can't be relied upon to vote to uh, against people that in office have proven that they're ineffective, then how could you possibly uh, re- expect the people to vote for people that haven't proven anything in office. So in essence, what I'm saying is that the problem isn't necessarily with the fact that we're re-electing bad politicians. It's that there's people that are willing to re-elect bad politicians, and we have to solve that problem. And I don't think that term limits will actually be the solution.
Interesting. I like these counter not counterintuitive. It just goes against the your mainstream. Like most people are big fans of congressional term limits. So yeah, what would you say to that? So you're basically Anavoltis. You're saying that it's the people electing them, not necessarily the politicians.
Well,
What would you?
obviously, if it's a bad politician, it's a bad politician. But what does that then say about the people that vote for them? It means that they're either uninformed or malicious.
Hmm, uninformed or malicious? Yeah. Karl, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I guess my response is just that the power of incumbency is too great to the point where it inhibits democracy. Like people just we just know from there's a lot of data by being an incumbent you have a significant advantage in an election. This transcends not just in the US, this is all countries. Incumbency is a massive thing. And I think that unless we want people to like Nancy Pelosi, if we bring up someone that a lot of people in your audience probably don't like, or Mitch McConnell, anybody, any of these people, I think that they shouldn't have been in office for as long as they have been.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, I think I think it's a very, very good point that people kind of overlook that leaders need followers. And in order for there to be a leader, they have to have some support unless the voting's rigged. So they need people electing them. So I think that's, but it's just, it's a breath of fresh air, even if I don't know whether I agree with it or not. I think that I've been a congressional term limits guy for so long that hearing someone just say 100% opposed, I'm like, whoa. So I got to think about it. But,
Because if there's a good leader, I'd want to re-elect him as many times as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Okay, so end bureaucratic government bullying of U.S. citizens and small businesses. This is kind of more like a regulation thing. I don't know what bullying is. Is regulation bullying? What are your thoughts on that, Anna Voltis? Like, is there
It can be.
bureaucratic?
I
Yeah.
guess if it's specifically targeted against a particular group, you could call it bullying.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I'm in favor of decentralizing economics. So in that sense, I'm not directly opposed to the idea of regulation. I think if people want to have regulation, they can have it. But if people don't want regulation, then they can also not have it, and then it'll be their responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the decentralized thing because it gives people choice. I mean, there's a like to me the right amount of freedom is built into decentralizing because everyone can kind of do their own thing and you can test things and scale them up as well. So it says expose Washington's money trail and delegate powers back to the people and states. So I'm interested in to see what Karl has to say about this because this is kind of going away from centralization and like a big federal government. So what do you think about that delegating powers back to the people and states, Karl?
I mean, honestly, in general, I think that we should have more things done by the federal government and probably less things left to the state government. I don't think that that's probably surprising based on the other things that I've said in this thing. I do. He's talking about Washington's money trail, so I'm assuming he's talking about like federal funding of states. Is that what he's talking about? Like he wants less of that.
I think that he might be talking about a little bit of lobbyists, a little bit of like corporate influence, a little, and I would say if I'm guessing, that's what I would guess is that the non-government forces in it'd be like a two-pronged thing. It's like the non-government forces in Washington and just giving Washington less power. So I think he means lobbyists and more powerful than government corporations. That's what I would guess. What do you think? Do you agree with that, Anavoltis, when he says yeah, what is it? The Washington's money trail. If you're inferring into that, what do you think that means?
I agree with this point. When I assume Washington's money trail means that it's referring to people in Washington that are getting a lot of money from various donors, etc. I'm not in favor of this idea of people buying influence or buying power in the government. And I think one of the reasons why we have this is because of the way in which we implement democracy. If we had a cellular democracy, we probably wouldn't have to deal with the majority of this stuff.
Mm. Okay, so it's yeah, so you're kind of going to an issue previous, like you're all about cleaning up with like I don't know what the way to say it, but usually you'll take not an I don't know how to say it, but not an unconventional approach, but it seems like a lot of the things that people take for granted, you just say it's like a different thing altogether, right?
Well, I think the structure of the government influences how the government works and how people interact with it. So by restructuring the government into a way that money doesn't give you an advantage, then that obviously would reduce a lot of the incentive for putting money in politics.
Cool. Let's go over to defend our police now. So let's go over to Karl now. So it says we're going to kind of deal with the first two, and so it's fully fund and hire more police and law enforcement officers, increase criminal penalties for assaults on law enforcement officers. A couple kind of setup thoughts on that. I mean, Trump doesn't have the power to do that other than on a federal level. So I don't know whether he would do like an executive order or just to recommend that localities do that more, but it's not really in the federal government's power to do that for state and local police, but he can do that with federal police. But what are your thoughts on increasing criminal penalties for assaults on law enforcement officers and hire more police and law enforcement officers? And we'll just assume on the federal level.
Wait, so like I guess yeah, we could, yeah. I mean, obviously, he's trying to play off of the whole defund the police with the defend our police. Yeah. I think fully fund. I'm not sure exactly. Unless he's completely saying the opposite of defund, because to my understanding, police departments get a fair amount of funding already. So I'm not sure what he means by fully fund. And let's just continue that. Hire more police and law enforcement officers. That's such a blanket thing. I don't know if that's really the solution. And increase penalties for assaults on law enforcement officers. I don't know if necessarily when people are going to assault a law enforcement officer, if the first thing that they think is, well, what's the penalty for this? So I think with a lot of crimes, it's I actually read a study on this. It's like the likelihood that you'll get caught, not the severity of the punishment, that actually like influences whether or not you're going to do it. And so if more people, anyway, yeah, that's my take.
That's cool.
There's a lot of more points. I'd like to get to those too.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you why don't you select one out of the defend the police? If not, we can just keep going on to the immigration and things like that.
I guess.
Drive-by. Yeah, it's like the police one. It's kind of like, what does the federal government have? How can they do, like, specifically Antifa? Like, let's talk about that one, Karl. So do you think there should be federal prosecution for people that destroy property, especially federal government property, say in Portland or wherever else, these like federal courthouses and things like that? That's the federal government's property. You talked about you in general would like to see more power to the federal government. Is that one of the areas that you want them to have more power? I'll just say I don't condone like the rioting and like the breaking property. I don't think that that's the way to go about the. But we have you on camera, Karl. What'd you say? We see you breaking things with Molotov cocktails.
You guys already see that? Oh, never mind.
Okay, sorry. Keep going.
But no, I'm actually I think it's counterproductive. I don't think that that's how you convince people to your side. I don't think that. Yeah, it's just not productive. In terms of like, I don't know. He calls it like a violent extremist group like Antifa. Antifa is incredibly decentralized. Like, it's just like there's not like some central organization that is Antifa. It's just like a bunch of individuals that like wear masks at protests and stuff. So I think that this entire section on defund or defend our police, I think it's all just posturing for the most part. Because what does that even mean? Bring them to justice?
Yeah. Okay. So Anna Voltas, what about just on this the defend our police, all the ones in there in general? Do you agree with those points or no?
Well, I think policing locally, of course, is going to depend on how much you need in a town, and that's obviously going to be very hard to determine from the federal level. Now, obviously, if there's complete unrest on the local level, then obviously you'd want to have interference from higher up and support in order to restore the peace. So what I'm saying is police, we need as much as we need, and to determine that would have to really be in the towns and look at what's going on in there. Some towns might have too many, some towns might not have enough, but that's obviously going to have to be a determination that a lot of thought goes into. But in regards to extremists, I oppose extremism, especially insurrectionism. So if people are attacking police or federal property, I, of course, am in favor of them being prosecuted with strong penalties.
Okay. School. Let's just go on to the next one. So I mean, if I'm guessing, I'm assuming that Carl, you want to talk about the immigration the most.
That one
There's
looks interesting. That
yeah.
I
Let's
just
let's
saying,
talk
that
about
looks
that.
pretty.
So just a little talking shop real fast. We said we would do an hour and a half. I'm certainly willing to go. An hour and 45 or even closer to 2 hours. Are you guys good for 20 extra minutes or whatever?
Sure.
Good.
Works for me.
All right, sweet. All right, so let's go over to immigration. So, I do actually want to go to Anavoltus first on this one because I don't think we talked about that much immigration when I had you guys on last time. So let's. So it says block illegal immigrants from becoming eligible for taxpayer-funded welfare, healthcare, and free college tuition. So Anavoltus, what do you think about agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle?
Well, I think if somebody is in this country and has entered it in an illegal way or is illegally staying in this country, I don't think they should be eligible to such programs, or at least they should be criminally prosecuted first before being eligible for anything.
Okay, pretty simple. What do you think about that, Carl?
I mean, I have no problem with people who come here from other countries having access to welfare programs. I think that if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the number of undocumented immigrants, there's a smaller percentage of them that are on welfare programs as people that live here. I could be on miscorrect on that though. But just in principle, like I think that if you have a real problem with this whole notion of free riders, these people that aren't paying into these systems, but they are getting something back from it. I think the solution is to give them citizenship so they can pay into those programs, not to stop them from getting health care or their kids from having education.
Yeah, Anavoltus, do you have a response?
Well, I think for the sake of justice, it's very important to at least first prosecute their illegal entry or residence, because we do have laws under which people can enter the country legally and can immigrate legally. And so if people choose to deliberately avoid that, I do think that we should prosecute them first before we give them any benefits.
Yeah, I think it's kind of insane not to. But Carl, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say Anavoltis, like when you bring up like kind of like deliberately avoiding it. I mean, when you talk about the difficulty of our current immigration process, I don't think that it's these people. I'm sure that if they had the means, if they had if they had 7 years that they could wait around, if they had thousands of dollars, they would like to go through the proper process. But the unfortunate reality is that our immigration process is very very difficult. And
Well, if it's
I
too
think that's
hard,
one.
then they shouldn't come.
Wait, that doesn't make sense at all.
Yes, it
Because
does.
the process is difficult, that means that they shouldn't come.
Well,
Yes.
if they're not willing to go to the through the process that we have, then they shouldn't come, or we should reform our process to make it more amenable.
See, that's
But
what. So people always use like we should reform the process, but that no one ever does that part. Like that was Donald Trump's thing. He's like, I want to make it easier for people to come here legally. He didn't do that at all. He hasn't even at any point made it easier for people to come here legally. And so it's like I feel like people always like say like, well, we'll just make it easier for people to come, but then no one ever does that though.
and
Like, do you guys think that it should take like 7 years? It should cost thousands of dollars? Like,
I don't.
Yeah, I think we should close the border. I mean, like, so I'm just the host right now. So I mean, like, that so I don't think I think that it's a right of a nation to refuse every single person for whatever reason. Just like a company has the right to just not hire someone for whatever reason, they don't even have to disclose the reason. It's frankly none of the business of the person getting hired.
but so why do you think that we should not allow immigrants though?
Because well,
And also, how
I,
do you reconcile that with anti-government?
I don't know. I'm going through my own process. That's the cool thing about streaming every day, and it's like I'm an open book. I've changed so much in the 2 years I've been studying this stuff that I don't know. I'm starting to rethink whether I'm anti-government, and frankly, the more I get into Christianity, the more I accept government. Like the last like 6 to 8 months have been like real hard look at the Bible, really talking to Christian friends all the time, and I think that Like I believe that the Bible says that government is here to stay. Have not really been able to come up with a whether government is moral or immoral according to the Bible, but I think that it's here to stay, that government is ordained by God. Uh and so I don't know how to square that, man. I was an anarcho-capitalist 2 years ago, and so I'm not now. So I don't know, but I just think as far as rights, um it is the moral right of a country to almost for whatever reason refuse anybody, basically, and they have a responsibility to their
Why
own
should we
people.
close the borders though?
Well, okay, so that was just the number one. That's um I don't before I'm going to talk about should, I'm talking about could. Like it's their right to do so regardless. But should, I just think it's gotten, you know, where I just don't think there's economic space left, and the more that we pretend that there's not, like future generations are being affected so much by this printing of money, pretending that things have value when they don't, that this is going to come and bite us one day when everything runs out, when it's going to be basically, you know, Weimar Germany, buckets of cash buying a loaf of bread. And that's what I mean by economic space. When people say America's full, they're not talking about there's no space left in Wyoming. It's that there's people that were here before any of these immigrants showed up that are struggling right now. A lot of them are black people. Not that I really care about the race either way, but like there's people that are more American than illegal immigrants, and they're getting passed over. And the solution to that is not to print more money and to give more money out. It will run out one day, and so will citizenship will get diluted to the point that it means nothing. And that's what happened at the end of Rome as well. So I'm anti-dilution, I'm anti-saturation to the point of things not meaning anything. So I think, given that it's the nation's right to do so, and that Americans that are more American than illegal immigrants, the reason I know that is because it's built into the definition. One of them are actual Americans. The other group are currently not actual Americans. So I just think that I would like to see the experiment of just closing that bitch. A lot of countries have done it before. If someone can make the argument that other countries have socialized medicine, I can make the argument of other countries have closed their border and been fine.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm
Well,
saying.
so I think there's a lot to unpack there. Well, I would just like to say that whenever I bring up that there's socialized medicine in all these other countries, the reason I bring that up is because they have better health outcomes than we do. Not like, oh, they do it so we should too, because like I mean,
Right.
the obvious
And I'm
example is
saying
like if every
places like Hungary, places like Poland, it's the same argument. They are better off because of their immigration policy.
See, but I think that that's not backed up by the data though. I think that
What
almost
data?
any economic research that you can look at, immigration helps countries.
No, I'm talking about a subjective viewpoint. I'm talking about I think it turns out better regardless of your study. They have more national cohesion. They have more national pride. They have more, like, they prioritize their own people. I don't need any study to tell me that that's true.
Wait, well, I mean, that is, I feel like that is something you could look up in a study, like how much national pride people who are immigrants feel here. But I feel like, so your argument is not an economic argument because you brought up, it hurts our
No,
economy.
it's a moral one. First and foremost is a moral one.
Well, so could you elaborate the moral argument then?
You should prioritize your own people over not your own people.
But if it helps the people here when people come,
like, because all we have here is another person telling me how it benefits us more. I'm literally talking about the tribal notion of even if you think that it would improve my lawn, it's my lawn. That's the
well, how do you
argument.
reconcile that with your Christian beliefs then?
Oh,
Like,
I
I don't want these people to come here. I forget them. I don't care about them.
How do you reconcile it? Where does it say in the Bible that you have to prioritize other people over your own family?
I don't think that it will require you to, but I don't think that letting immigrants come here requires you prioritizing them over your family. But
I'm talking about the Bible.
No, I know, and I'm saying, how does the Bible?
I'm saying the burden of proof. If you've read the Bible, the burden of proof is on you to tell me why I should prioritize other people over my own family.
No, and that's what I'm saying. Immigration does not mean you prioritize them over your family.
But that's you talking.
Can you tell me how it prioritizes them?
I'm in a house.
Okay.
There's people inside of it that are called my family.
Okay.
letting other people in would give resources to people not called my family.
But no one's telling you to let them into your house. People are saying to let them into the
I'm
country.
making an analogy to the country, yes.
But they're separate things though.
I don't know. Involtus, can you make sense of this? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, where do you fall
Well,
in this debate?
in regards to the house analogy, I do agree on the point that if we are using the house as a microcosm for a country,
Mm.
obviously we wouldn't want people to come in unannounced without permission through the window. Uh, so I think people coming in through the door is a fair way to let people in. And likewise, I think it is the right of any sovereign state to refuse the admittance of others, even though I'm personally not opposed to the idea of immigration. I think that immigration, there's a couple of things important for immigration in my view. One is reciprocity in international relations. In other words, if we're going to give citizenship to someone, we have to be sure that the country they're coming from is willing to relinquish their citizenship.
Mm.
Otherwise, we might be, in essence, doing something that would be akin as allowing someone to commit treason, which is I don't
That's a
think is
really good
something.
point. I never thought about that.
But
It's a
at the
very,
same
very good
time,
point.
when it concerns the internal structure of the country, um, under my decentralized system, the idea of unity in an economic or in a national sense isn't really that important. What I do think is that if people are coming in, they should have a community that is willing to accept them coming in.
Mm.
Uh, so,
Sponsorship,
so
invite
in
type thing.
other words, somebody that is essentially willing to vouch for them and to let them in a safe sense. And we also have to make sure that if they are coming in, they're not also being prosecuted in another country for some crime that is unresolved. We don't want people escaping justice by coming to our country.
Okay, gotcha. And so it's and I'm not. I am interested in talking immigration with you, Karl, and Anna and stuff like that. It's just that we can definitely go like 30 or 40 more rounds down. That's just that we're here to talk about Trump's plan. There's a lot more to do if we. So it's like I definitely would talk if we want to do a full stream on vaccinations, if we want to do a full stream on immigration, whatever. Or if you, Karl, if you want to call into my solo show, I'm down to do that too. It's just I'm not moving along because I don't want to talk about it. It's just that we have a lot more to do on here, unless we want to stick on immigration the whole time. But it's good to talk about this stuff. So it says end sanctuary cities. I have a feeling I'm going to go to Anavoltis first, then we're going to go to Karl after that. So what do you think about ending sanctuary cities, Anavoltis?
Well, the big problem with sanctuary cities, and also I will say that the idea of sanctuary cities is in essence very similar to the idea of Amendment sanctuaries, in that we're having one level of government that is essentially disobeying a higher level of government. And this is something that I generally think should be avoided, at least in the name of law and order. So, in that sense, I think that sanctuary cities should not exist because it is a violation of the sovereignty of the United States, as well as the United States' ability to control its international relations through its immigration policy.
Yeah. So, Karl, the contradiction I kind of see with with sanctuary cities, he kind of just said, is that you can advocate for a stronger federal government, or you could advocate for sanctuary cities. Like, but it does violate the sovereignty in fact. So how do you square that, Karl?
I guess it's one of those things where if you view something as an unjust law, you don't necessarily have a problem with people breaking
Mm-hmm.
it necessarily. And
Yeah.
I would not consider our current immigration laws just. And
Mm-hmm.
so if people are going to have sanctuary cities, which I think is a good thing, I don't think that that's a moral wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gotcha. So it's you know so it's selective. It's whether you like, or you or whoever is making the call on whether the thing is just or not. That's hard. That's kind of dangerous, man. like I think it's hard to be selective. Like being principled is it's harder to do, but it makes more sense to me. That's why what Anna Voltis is saying more for me is like it makes more sense because where where's the moral center? I think all of us agree that God is the moral arbiter of the universe, however one would say it, like wherever
Well,
one
I,
gets
I
it.
personally think of it as a moral hierarchy, that there's
Mm,
different authorities, and God's authority is absolute. However, God has instituted lesser authorities that, so long as they are not in direct contradiction to the higher authority, are also moral authorities in themselves. So I do think it is a moral issue, uh, whether or not you follow laws.
mm, okay. Interesting. So I mean, I don't know. So the next couple are prohibit American companies from replacing United States citizens with lower cost foreign workers. I mean, we could just do another stream if we want on immigration. That sounds very very interesting. Let's move on from immigration because I just don't want to just we're probably just gonna hit the wall over and over, which is not a big deal. Let's just move on. Um, Space Force. Innovate for the future. What launch Space Force, establish permanent man presence on the moon, and send the first manned mission to Mars. What do you think about that, Karl?
I think that some of the kind of like second order benefits of investing heavily into like something like NASA is kind of good just because there are a lot of innovations that came out of NASA. And so, I mean, it's not like it's honestly not my number one priority
Yeah.
as of right now, but I'm not like opposed to it.
Yeah, like these last three columns are kind of, you know, they're feel good, specific feel good stuff. Like, oh man, some of these I don't like. It's just some conspiracy guy. Like I don't
Yeah.
even believe in NASA. Like, but what do you think about Space Force, Anavoltis?
I well, I agree that as technology develops, it becomes more important to be concerned about the space vector for warfare. Uh, I do think that having manned missions is probably an unjustified expenditure. I think that while we do see innovations are never a guarantee, and in regards to whether or not we should have manned missions, I think that's a large budgetary expenditure. It's very expensive, and I don't really think that it is justified, at least in the sense of public spending. If people want to get together and invest in a company uh, that does that, I think that's fine. But I just am not interested in large amounts of tax money going into something like that.
Yeah. Um, Man mission to Mars, build the world's greatest infrastructure system. Frankly, like it's another one of those interesting things. I mean, I just don't think it's the on America's. Yeah, the world's greatest. I don't know. You might not beat China. They're pretty linked up. Win the race to 5G and establish a national high-speed wireless internet network. I don't know if we have that already. Um, but like I thought that
Is it a
4G was really,
race?
yeah. I don't know. It's like
It's
kind of
not like a space race or an arms race. It's just slightly higher quality.
yeah. Continue to lead the world in access to the cleanest drinking water and the cleanest air. You have to say this in Trump's voice because it's all like the biggest and the best.
Well,
Um,
certainly cleaner than China. I think
yeah,
we're definitely winning on that front. But
yeah. I mean, that's one thing that is, I think that most smart people are pro environment, are like anti pollution. I think people will agree or disagree on climate change, whether what it is or whatever, or whether it's real or not. But like only a fool would be pro pollution, and it seems like China is. It
well,
seems like they are
I don't
pro
think
pollution.
that they're necessarily pro pollution. I
Mm,
think it has to do with them being a developing country that's sort of behind the U.S. In its infrastructure, in regards to building up a lot of the structures needed to deal with that, especially with a large population.
yeah.
So,
What do you? We'll start with Karl. What do you think about partnering up with other nations to clean up our planet's oceans?
I think that's a good thing. I think that we honestly, if we wanted to actually like fight climate change, I think that if we aren't doing it with other nations, it's not going to work. You know what I mean? And I think that, and just with the point on China, I would say that China, they do a ton of pollution, don't get me wrong, but they do a lot of it on the behalf of other countries because they are kind of this like manufacturing hub for the rest of the world. So it's like
Yeah.
they do it for like a lot of their pollution, comes from making our goods. So, it's just like it is still them, I guess, technically, but I would delineate it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of like that's why I've actually gotten a bunch of pushback from like climate change alarmists, as I would put it, for just taking can we agree on being anti-pollution? They're like, that doesn't do enough. I'm like, dude, how about if we just be anti-pollution and anti-littering and let the chips fall where they may? Because it's like less grime. Most of the climate change people say that would clean up climate change. So I'm like, cool. I'm like, cool. Why don't we just live cleaner, and then things might get cleaned up. But I mean, what do you think about the partnering with other nations to clean up the planet's oceans, Anavoltis?
I think that's a fair thing. I don't think that we necessarily have to do this on the government level. I think there's a lot of private and charity areas where people would do this. So, of course, if the government itself were responsible for a large amount of littering, then I would certainly be in favor of the government cleaning it up. But in regards to pollution, yes, I do agree that pollution is something that we can agree in general is a bad thing. Now, of course, I will say that when it comes to things that are not directly polluting, such as CO2, we have to think about developing countries and the fact that developing countries don't really have the infrastructure to use less polluting resources that we do. They don't have the wealth and the infrastructure. And I think a good argument was made by someone saying that they go from wood to coal to oil to natural gas and then to nuclear, and that this is an affordable progression that countries make that doesn't require them to sacrifice on their development.
Gotcha. So then the last one, or the last couple, was America first, foreign policy, and defend American values. So stop the endless wars and bring our troops home. I'm definitely, like, almost without even reading the policy, on board with that. I know Karl is too. Ina Voltis, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want us to pull out of other countries?
Well, what I think is we shouldn't be involved in other countries unless we are very explicit as to what we're there for. In other words, we actually should have a particular goal, and we shouldn't attack countries without provocation. So, in that sense, I think that if we do have a war with a country, it should be with the intent to win and to actually have a clear goal as to how to achieve that.
Yes.
But I'm actually against the idea of the large scale global deployment of all these troops. Um,
Yeah.
Unless it's against China, right?
I,
I'm
yeah,
just kidding.
well, yeah, that's a good point. Like, how, yeah, yeah, what do you think? Well, I mean, you could kind of break that into bits, because you could be advocating for military intervention with China without large scale deployment of troops. So,
well,
yeah,
if it is China, it would have to be larger, at least, than a lot of smaller
Good
deployments.
point, Karl.
But I'm not but I'm not in favor of attacking countries in a very secret way, or in a very subversive way, such as uh,
Like our coups in Latin America, like you'd be against those.
uh, well, if we're talking about current politics, I think Syria would be a huge example where I think we majorly messed up. Um, I think
Like
it was
measures, right?
Operation Timber Cypress or something, where we were arming the rebels, and then some of the rebels turned out to be quite radical dudes.
Such
So,
a mess, man. It's such a mess how it
yeah,
all played
so
out.
I think
Two
the
decades.
Arab Spring was vastly mishandled. And I don't think that we should be doing covert ops unless we have a declaration of war against the country that we're doing it. So what I'm saying is that we shouldn't be involved in these tiny little bit wars. If we're going to have a war, we should ensure that it's very clear what the goals are and that we're not being sort of two-faced about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. The next one is get allies to pay their fair share. Now, this is a phrase that I wish could be retired from all of politics, and that is the idea of the fair share. No one knows what that means on either side, left or right. Trump says it about our allies. People on the left say it about rich people. It makes no sense. I don't know what that shit means, but it like I don't even know where to like the phrase like makes me so like violates my linguistic sensibilities so bad that I don't even know what to say. But like, do you guys think allies should pay their fair share? He's talking about trade deals and stuff like that. And also you've heard of
He's also talking about like NATO.
yeah. I was just gonna, yeah. He talks about like military capital essentially. So should allies pay their fair share, guys?
I mean, when we start a majority of these conflicts, I'm
Yeah.
like, why are we like, oh, you have to pay more, but like also we're gonna like go invade Iraq? It's like, well, that's not very fair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's not like it's not a one-to-one thing like that, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Life's not fair. This isn't fair. We did start some of these things. A lot of these things started before any of us were alive. That's the other part that's really hard to grasp or just to square about this stuff. Is like most people were like under 10 years old or dead, or they're now dead in a lot of these. A lot of this stuff goes back to World War One. So especially the Middle East stuff. So I don't know what that means, but what do you think about the fair share thing from our allies, Anaveltis?
In regards to the fair share, I think that of course the U.S. disproportionately pays in NATO, but at the same time the U.S. Deploys more in NATO and has a lot more invested in it, and NATO is probably a very large benefit to the U.S. directly in the exercise of its hegemony. So I think it really depends on whether we're willing to sort of take a back seat on this or whether we still want to be up in front.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what the next three kind of are. It's maintain and expand America's unrivaled military strength, wipe out global terrorists who threaten to harm Americans. I mean, especially with that one, we happen to have created a lot of these groups. So, okay, wipe them out or don't. I don't know what to say, but wiping out people that want to kill you is not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. But without addressing the root issue, which is our intervention, I think that you're just going to create more. So I don't know how to, you know, I think you can hold both beliefs that like defending yourself is a good thing, but also look how things start. So wipe out global terrorists, threaten to harm America, build a great cybersecurity defense system with a missile defense system. Cool. Dude, I think we're gonna go on to defending American values now because it goes to the point that Anavoltos was just saying. Like, it depends on where you want to be in the hierarchy. Whether like it's about just choices. Um, and some of them and a lot of them result in death or death abroad, death at home or whatever. But it's like it's what does how does America want to see its violence thing the next 50 years or so. So I mean I certainly would like to see them come home, but I like what Anavolta is saying is kind of like half measures. You finish what you start and you have a clear goal. Let's go on to the last one, defend American values. Now I will say all four of these things that it says here I am 100% on board with continue nominating constitutional Supreme Court and lower judges, protect unborn life through every means available, defend the freedoms of religious believers and organizations, support the exercise of Second Amendment rights. That's if this is what the explicit statement from the Trump campaign, I'm going to vote for him. This is enough for me right here. Being pro-life, pro-constitution, religious freedom, Second Amendment. That's all I need. I could draw blind on these other ones we just talked about. This is almost everything to me. These last ones. So what's your thoughts on that, Anavoltus?
Um, okay. Let me just quickly adjust my view here. The Supreme Court, I think, is too powerful in the first place. I'm in favor of going to a civil law system over a common law system. So I don't think that this really solves anything long term, because then eventually, somewhere down the line, somebody's going to make a ruling you don't like. So, and it happens all the time, and then everybody's upset. Um, Protecting unborn life for every means available, I'm in favor of that. Defending the freedoms of religious believers and organizations, I'm in favor of that. Supporting the exercise of Second Amendment rights, no problem there for me.
But that's interesting when you say it's like, again, I don't know what the word to call it, either not counterintuitive and maybe not conventional, is that the point is that the Supreme Court just has too much power. Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm saying that, like, if you're gonna nominate them, it should be in line with the Constitution, if you like the Constitution, and we could have that debate in a different show, whether that's a good document or whatever. But what do you think about those four, relatively quickly? We can spend some time on it though. But Karl, what do you think about those 4 points right there?
Yeah, I know. I wish the last 4 points were like four incredibly dynamic points. So you could spend hours talking about each of them individually. But I can't really fault him for saying he's going to nominate more judges, because that's what you'd expect. I will say I'll kind of agree with Anna Voltis, where I wish the Supreme Court had less power. I think that we need term limits for Supreme Court justice. I'm strongly against lifetime appointments. I don't think that that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because I know Democrats have talked about just adding more justices. I don't think that that's the solution.
Yeah, to be honest, Karl, it's good to hear someone on the left or Democrats even say that, because I've heard people talk about packing the courts, like all kinds of stuff. That's cool, man. Yeah.
It'd be a disaster because the other side just does it. You know what I mean? Like, how you never win with that. We don't have to, go into the whole pro-life pro-choice thing if you guys don't want.
That's a different stream all in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Defend the freedoms of religious believers and organizations. I mean, I do think the religious freedoms are incredibly important. I think that those should be protected. I would probably disagree that there's, other than red meat for his base, I don't think that there's any notion that those are under attack. But then support the exercise of Second Amendment rights. I'm not against this. Honestly, of all the issues that people talk about, the Second Amendment is probably the one that I'm most moderate on. I think that people should be able to have guns. I think that I'm in favor of like background checks and stuff like that. But I don't think that makes me extreme. I will say that, like, I think that when we were talking about the foreign policy stuff, I feel like it's worth mentioning that Trump isn't going to do the whole stop. Like, he'll talk about stop endless wars, but he's not going to. Like, I think his first term shows that he has no interest in actually ending any of the wars. Given the fact that he's escalated our drone war and gotten us more involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't know if, still haven't gone through the whole thought process on my own, but I feel like an American president, like post 1990, there's something about they're either hamstrung or they have too much they've shaken too many hands. They're in people's pockets where they can't end the wars. Like, I think they can't. It's more of a can't rather than a want.
Well, I think part of it comes from the fact that each administration, you get new people, a bunch of new appointments in the Department of State. And that means that you have a bunch of people that probably aren't very experienced and need to be caught up on a lot of situations, because a lot of what happens in foreign policy isn't generally reported on in the media, from either side, really. So in that sense, they tend to lean on already established people in the IR community, international relations community, and that's where you get the accusations of the so-called deep state coming from. It's because there's this long-term influence that occurs, and it's somewhat necessary because of a way in which we operate our government, where we have a sort of spoil system where we have to reappoint everyone every 4 to 8 years. So it's a bit more difficult to have long-term plans in that sense, unless there's people sitting around that follow that.
Gotcha. Well, go ahead, man. It's good.
Oh, I got a cool, because you brought up the whole since 1990, candidates they can't end the wars. I always thought that Noam Chomsky had an interesting quote. It was just post World War II, every single U.S. president, if the Nuremberg trials had been upheld, would be hanged for war crimes.
Yep.
And so this is since World War II. This has been every single U.S. president. Pick your favorite one. They're a war criminal.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's just I that's why I'm not in the first place. I think it just be war. And like international law, I just don't like, because the whole like the laws of Nuremberg, the rule was if the Nazis did it, they were guilty. If we did it, we were innocent. So it's like I'm just not even a fan of like international law or international standards. I think it should basically like declare war or no. I mean, because it's like, to what authority, and like the UN gets compromised. Like all these standard setting organizations, they're essentially bullshit. It just becomes about power dynamics, which is war in the first place. I don't know. Do you agree with that? And Voltus, I'm interested in what your take on international law is.
Well, in regards to the Nuremberg protocols, I do think that this idea that a country is accountable for some law that didn't exist doesn't make sense. I think they should have been prosecuted by right of conquest rather than by some trumped up human rights idea. So, in that sense, I do disagree with the UN on a number of things, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Not just from a philosophical perspective, but I think from a Christian perspective, it's heretical. So, in that sense, I am in disagreement largely with the international community on this.
Interesting. All right, well, guys, we just did 2 hours. I have one final question for each of you, and then I'm going to get you guys to plug your work and how to find your channels and stuff like that. So, looking through like our original conversation about this stuff, Anavoltus, you said that you were appalled by Trump's plan, and Karl, you said it was pretty awful. So, Anavoltus, what were you the most? What was in general or specifically appalling to you about it? And then we'll go to Karl.
Well, what I didn't like was that it revolved very much around the president making promises on doing various things in the economy that require him to really overstep what I think the president should be able to do. So in that sense, I don't think it's a good standard for long-term success that is being established here. And also, I've been saying this since 2016, and I know it's a bit controversial, but I think Trump is a bit of a pinko.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
What is that?
I think he has some mild socialist tendencies.
I agree. I think that your standard like conservative is like a socialist basically now. They're all big government. Yeah. It's very interesting. What was the word you used though?
Pinko.
Pinko.
It's a mild form of red.
A mild form of red. Oh, I see what you're saying. Pinko. I've never heard that until right. A pinko commie. I'm looking it up right now. Pinko is a pejorative coined in 1925 in the United States to describe a person regarded as being sympathetic to communism, although not necessarily a Communist Party member. It's since become used to describe anyone perceived to have leftist or socialist sympathies. All right, I'm going to use that one in a sentence, dude. So Karl, what about you? What do you think was pretty awful in your words, specifically or generally, about the plan?
I guess my biggest problem is that he brings up, Anavolta said a lot of things that he shouldn't do, that the president shouldn't be doing. I think that he brought up a lot of things that he's not going to do. I don't think that he's going to create 10 million jobs. I don't think he's going to protect small businesses, and I definitely don't think he's going to end the wars. Yeah. And so there are some things I just flat out disagree with, but I appreciate Anavoltus. I learned 2 new words: Thucydides Trap and Pinko. I got 2 new words in the vocab now.
That's awesome. Yeah, you just got to keep Anavoltus talking, man. You learn all kinds of stuff. All right, gents. That's all the time we have. So let's go to Karl and then Anavoltus and tell us where to find your work. Everything's linked below in the show description, but just tell us a little bit about what you do and where to find you online.
Yeah, the main thing I'd like you guys, if you want to look me up, is on YouTube. I post every day. I talk about politics. That's basically all that I talk about, and I try to be pretty pragmatic. I talk about electoral politics, international stuff, and
All right, sweet. And so that's linked below in the show description. And Anna Voltus, why don't you talk about what you try to do and where to find you?
Okay, I'm Anawiltus. I'm a philosopher and also a YouTuber. So you can find me on YouTube. You can also find me on BitChute. And I also have a website, coinonism.com, that talks about my political system called coinonism.
All right, everybody. And I'm Stephen Ignoramus. I'm back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time with the Daily Ignoramus. And then I'll be back on Thursday afternoon with Matt Christensen of Beauty and the Beta. That was a good podcast, everybody. Thanks to Anna Voltus and Karl for coming on. And this will be uploaded as a podcast in a couple days. All right, sweet. Nice, y'all. That was cool. Good chatting with you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Steven. This was fun.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, any more ideas you guys have, just float them out. I'm down to do this